Welcome to the next stage in the retrospective of the Uncharted series. Last video I went through the optional treasures to find in the first Uncharted and their real-world counterparts, or at least the cultures from which those artifacts could be from. So with the optional knickknacks covered, it's time to move on to the main event, to the hunt for the real treasure, the fabled El Dorado, and discuss the journey itself, the characters, and everything they faced in this opening adventure for not only Nathan Drake, but also Naughty Dog itself. This is Uncharted: Drake's Fortune. Timestamps in the description will point you to the specific chapters and moments. Please also remember, this is a deep dive into elements of the Uncharted series. There will be spoilers. There will be a lot of spoilers. I covered the basics of the development history of Uncharted in the Everything You Need to Know primer video, but I'll summarize what I mentioned there before we move on to other details of the game's development, such as music. I'll break it down into small bullet points for your convenience. 1. Uncharted started as a pitch called Project Big, with the up until then unnamed protagonist modeled after Johnny Knoxville. 2. The team started out small with about 6 people, among them Amy Hennig. The director was Soul Reaver, acting in the same capacity and also lead writer. 3. The development and storytelling were done in tandem and they fed into one another, with all members of the team able to offer their own ideas. Designer Neil Druckmann and lead animator designer Josh Scher served as co-writers along with Hennig. Finally, voice acting and mocap were also done as the game was being designed and worked on, and animators used the footage from the mocap to hand animate the characters' facial animations. So if a character rubbed their eyes as a sign of the character's frustration, the animators made sure the facial expressions would match the actors' actions. Now on to other details. Uncharted was both meant to evoke the feeling of and was inspired by not just Indiana Jones, but also classic pulp adventure magazines. In an interview, Amy Hennig said she always loved the old pulp serials, novels and movies of the 1920s and 30s like Buck Rogers, Doc Savage, and Gunga Din. But beyond that, also comics like Tintin and even the 80s Disney comic series Uncle Scrooge Adventures. The core tenet behind Uncharted, at least from Hennig's perspective, was to pay homage to all those pieces of classic adventure media, but in video game form with the player in the driving seat. While the recording, story, design, and development happened more or less in tandem, one aspect that came in much later was the music. It's the work of composer Greg Edmonson, who also worked on the short-lived cult classic Joss Whedon TV show Firefly. In an interview, Edmonson stated that Amy Hennig's perspective on Uncharted was critical to the game having a heart. According to him, Hennig told him she wanted to make a game for people who maybe weren't interested in gaming or didn't think they would be. Make it something with wide appeal. And so her focus was on making characters that people would care about. Then, given that she was the writer and director, she could make the necessary moves and decisions to make that happen, up to and including casting the people who would bring the script to life in a meaningful way. Uncharted was Edmondson's first video game score, and so he very much learned by doing. One of the decisions was, when composing pieces, to create them in sections of about 30 seconds of build, with the conclusion then having a pause before the build began again. The result was, by sheer happenstance, situations where the breakpoint for one section and the build for the next perfectly matched the character's actions, so players felt the music was working in tandem with their gameplay and seemingly on the same journey. Edmondson commented that players would often ask how they accomplished that, forcing them to admit that it was just coincidence. But because of the pattern and the way the music was composed, it was something that tended to happen a lot, and never in the same places. The piece of music we now simply know as Nathan's theme, or the main theme of Uncharted, was another piece of wonderful coincidence. At the time, Naughty Dog and Sony had agreed to produce and perform anything and everything that Edmondson composed, and that particular piece of music was one he created without a specific goal in mind, without a placement in the overall scheme of the game, which made it the perfect choice for the main menu, which at the time lacked the music track. On a final note of development, before we move on to the events of Uncharted: Drake's Fortune, is that if it wasn't for the release of a certain other game, another third-person shooter, the gameplay of Uncharted as we know it today would have been very different. In an interview, Lucas Pope, the man behind Papers, Please, and Return of the Obra Dinn, who at the time was a developer at Naughty Dog, stated that they announced Uncharted and then Gears of War came out and pretty much defined the modern third-person shooter. So they had to change everything, basically overhauling the gameplay with about 6 months left before the game released. But it wasn't just Gears. Uncharted is yet another game inspired by Resident Evil 4, one of the most influential and impactful games in history. It informed the team at Naughty Dog on how atmospheric storytelling should be done. Uncharted Drake's Fortune opens, very appropriately, with a quote from Sir Francis Draek. "There must be a beginning of any great matter, but the continuing unto the end, until it be thoroughly finished, yields the true glory." If you're wondering where that quote comes from, when did he say it, it's an excerpt, just a fragment of a letter Drake sent to Sir Francis Walsingham, Secretary of State for Queen Elizabeth I, to request reinforcements during part of the campaign of the Anglo-Spanish War near the end of the 16th century. The game presents this quote while we're looking at the ocean floor. Very few things carry as much mystery as the bottom of the ocean. Then we see a coffin. That's enough to convey to the player that this is something hidden, something forgotten, something worth paying attention to. It's a cinematic way of telling the players, buckle up, this is just the beginning. But it's not just the setting, it's also how the camera moves through the seaweed and, well, essentially bushes to reveal that lost treasure. And the music has this tone of trepidation, like we're stepping into forbidden grounds, uncovering an ancient secret. And one nice transition later, and the first words ever uttered in Uncharted are Elena's doing the narration of the discovery, or her travel show. They're off the coast of Panama. They have just found what could be the coffin of legendary explorer Sir Francis Draek, who was buried at sea 4 centuries ago. Nate doesn't waste time and immediately takes a crowbar to the thing. Elena comments on whether it's a good idea for him to desecrate his ancestors' remains, though she's not entirely convinced about his story of being Drake's descendant. After all, Sir Francis didn't have any children. Nathan tells her that history can be wrong and that you can't desecrate an empty coffin, revealing that this coffin has no body, no Sir Francis Draek inside. What is inside is the first piece of the mystery, of the adventure journey you, the player, are about to step on. And it's right there from the start. No time wasted on anything else. There's gonna be plenty of time to introduce these characters fully, their motivations and psyches. No, this opening segment needs to be about the adventure, to make you want to know more, to hook you in and get you on board with the ride. Inside the coffin is a journal, one that Drake is very excited to find, but refuses to share with Elena, despite her protestations on the matter. Before they can get any further in the discussion though, something happens on the horizon that catches Nate's attention, and he calls Sully on the radio, telling him they've got company. Elena demands to know what's going on, and Nathan simply replies, pirates! And as Elena turns to look, the camera follows her gaze, and we see 4 boats heading in their direction. A good adventure has a big mystery to uncover, and we got the first morsel of it. Now we need the other ingredient, the adrenaline surge, the danger. And our dear Indonesian pirates are here for that. How do I know they're Indonesian pirates? That's gonna come up later. Regardless, these are known enemies to Nathan. They've been following him for weeks. Nate grabs his guns, gives one to Elena, and the combat tutorial kicks in. After all, they can't call the authorities because, as Elena finds out, they're not exactly here with a permit. So if they do call them, jail's gonna be the only thing waiting for them, and Nate is not really enthused about being in a Panamanian jail. And you wouldn't be too. Panamanian jails are rough. As the fighting intensifies, the boat catches fire, forcing Elena and Nate to jump overboard. Thankfully, around the same time, Sully comes in for the save with his hydroplane, the first of a few we're gonna see him pilot across the series. He helps Elena on board and lays on the Sullivan charm. On the way back, Nate tells Sully that he found Drake's lost diary, proving Nathan's theory that Sir Francis Draek had faked his death, and that he was onto something big. Sully says, let's keep that between us, at which point Elena returns Nate's gun and tells him she believes she's earned a look at that journal. And what is in the journal? Well, while Elena is discussing with her producer over the phone, telling him of recent developments, Nate and Sully are on a boat, having their own little discussion, going over the contents of the journal and what it could mean. And this scene not only establishes what our adventure is going to be about in concrete terms, but offers a concise look at our characters and their priorities. Nathan is excited about the discovery, and he's all about giving Sully the historical exposition. Sure, he's after the treasure too, but proving his theory is part of it. Sully, on the other hand, doesn't give a damn about the history lesson, and just wants Nate to get to the point. He's in it for the gold, nothing else. But once Nathan points out what the goal is, what Sir Francis was looking for, El Dorado, then his interest is piqued enough to want to know the details. One thing Nathan shows him though is that the last page of the journal is missing. In fact, it looks like it was ripped out, likely to hide a big secret. Elena's priorities, on the other hand, are on her story, and making sure she doesn't lose access to it. So she's updating her producer and assuring him that this is a story worth telling, and that they have to move fast, because she doesn't trust the two obvious scumbags she's with. And hey, it turns out she's a good judge of character. She's absolutely right. But more so on Sully, not so much Nathan. Nathan is on board with bringing her along. She tells Sully she can hang. But Sully tells Nathan that they need to cut her loose, because he's worried that she wants to put this on blast on TV and potentially draw every treasure hunter and crook to them to the same pursuit. Just as Elena is making the comment that she doesn't trust them, giving Nathan and Sully a forced smile and a wave, which they return, Sully kicks the boat into gear and leaves her behind, something she admits she should have seen coming. And in any other story, this would mark Elena's exit, but no, not in Uncharted and not with Elena Fisher. Our scenes then move to the Amazon, where Sully and Nate are heading to the next stop on their journey, delivering some nice banter along the way, showing that nice chemistry between Nolan North and Richard McGonagall. But one comment from Sully stands out, that he stole a santo, that being a religious icon, usually a wooden symbol, but it can be up to a small statue, and that he took it from Pablo Escobar, the drug kingpin, founder of the Medellin cartel of Colombia, and the guy the show Narcos is based on. This was a very dangerous man, so Sully really stole from him. Then he's very brave, very stupid, very greedy, or all of the above. If the boat was the combat tutorial, the Amazon serves as the exploration, puzzling, and platforming tutorial, learning to identify climbable surfaces, hanging from ledges, and interacting with the environment, such as, pushing a boulder over a ledge to crash through a floor and open the path to certain ruins. In terms of puzzling, Uncharted isn't that much about the brain teasers, or about following instructions, as the solution to most, if not all, puzzles are in Nate's handy little notebook. Puzzles in Uncharted are more or less a vehicle for platforming. You know what to do. It's now just about doing it and clambering over whatever you need to get to the spot to trigger some kind of mechanism. And there is nothing that evokes the feeling of a pulp adventure more than what I like to call ancient machinery. You've seen it in movies, you've seen it in games like Tomb Raider, and of course, here in Uncharted. Those feats of impossible engineering. Complex machinery at an epic scale, but made centuries before, taking things that did exist and just taking them to the next level. In this case, it's those channels of oil or fuel running along the walls that characters often light and just, the flames spread, lighting up a room. In this case, it's a hearth made of metal that when you light it up, it sends the fire to distant hanging braziers through pipes on the ceiling, like ancient central heating. Or that's what you think at first. Given that in the room you first light one of these up, you need to shoot the braziers that get lit up to open the door as the braziers tip their contents and you burn through some rubble. But the real purpose of this system is to control doors. Yes, when you light one up, the door you came through closes and the next one opens up. So it's not ancient central heating, it's ancient airlock system. It's the Inca airlock system. And this is without mentioning the rising pillars, the mechanical pit you deal with in a different room, but that could be explained away, counterweights and all that. No, the central heating system and airlock system is the definite case example of ancient machinery. And I love it. You gotta love adventures. Wild nonsense like this only happens in adventures. Then afterwards, the game introduces 3 staples of the series. First is something that Naughty Dog, I think, refers to simply as cinematic action camera, but most people call it the crash cam. That action sequence where you run towards the camera, in the same way you do in the first level of Crash Bandicoot, which is where it originated. It's often used in the series during chases. The second is what I like to call the reverse Midas touch. Nathan Drake has it in spades. The reverse touch being everything he touches turns to crap, or simply breaks. Here you see the scaffolding that seemed just fine until he stepped on it, and then it crumbles and even giant statues along the walls decide to come for a tumble. The reverse Midas touch theory posits that if there is something that on its own has existed for centuries without even showing signs of decay or brittleness, they will, for sure, fail spectacularly the moment Nathan Drake comes in contact with them. And the last staple is, of course, that the adventure is never simple. It's never go to point B and find the treasure. There are legs to the journey, each of them providing more clues to what's actually going on and presenting more questions and mysteries. In this case, they get one answer. El Dorado is not a city, it's a giant golden statue. But it's not here. It was taken long before their arrival by Spaniards, by conquistadors. It's something that makes Sully very upset when they find out. He's, as he puts it, up to his eyeballs in debt and really needs the treasure. Remember that bit. It's gonna come up, and very soon, in fact. For the record, El Dorado translates simply to the Golden, though Nate translates it as the Golden Man, and given it's kind of a statue, I can see where he went with it, it's not technically incorrect. Back to the story though, Sully laments that they're a few centuries too late. Unless, Nathan says, we follow the tracks. And doing so brings them to an even bigger mystery. How in the hell did a German U-boat, a submarine, end up in a lagoon on the Amazon, part of it just over the edge of a waterfall? Being the younger, more agile of the pair, not to mention the more enthusiastic, Nathan offers to go into the U-boat, jokingly telling Sully that he'll give him a shout if he runs into any Nazis. Sully is not exactly on board, having a bad feeling about the whole thing, or as he puts it, there's something hinky. He's right, of course, but it's not Nathan who's got to worry about that, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Nathan gives Sully the journal, not wanting it to get wet, and then clambers across the surroundings, finding a path towards the deck of the U-boat and its entrance, where he finds the remains of Nazi officers. And something bad happened in this place. There's dried blood everywhere. Passing through a bulkhead, he finds a body and coins spread out. From the Latin phrase inscribed on them, Plus Ultra, these are Spanish coins, as Plus Ultra is the national motto of Spain for centuries. But they don't bear the coat of arms that was found in the minted coins of the era, but instead the image of a building, making Nathan curious as to their origin and how the Germans got a hold of them. This is a new clue in the mystery, and he relays that info to Sully. Passing another bulkhead, Nathan comes into the captain's quarters, where the former commander of this vessel is still there, but according to Nathan, it didn't go out in a nice way, looking instead like he was torn to shreds. But he died defending something. A map, still in his grasp. An old map to an island, inscribed with multiple notes and drawings. Nathan also finds a larger version of the map, of German make, bearing the name Verstecke Insel, which translates to Hideout Island, located off the coast of South America in the South Pacific. Nathan relays this to Sully as well, confident that the Germans and Sir Francis were after the same treasure, and that this place is both their next destination and what would have been on the missing journal page. Sully only hopes it's not another wild goose chase, but his message cuts off midway through. Remember when I told you that it was Sully who had to worry, and also remember that bit about Sully being up to his eyeballs in debt? Well, both those things are about to come into focus. You see, Sully may have blabbed a bit, probably to give assurances to the people he owed money to, and they decided to follow the pair here. These are our main bad guys. Gabriel Roman, voiced by none other than Simon Templeman himself, Kane from Legacy of Kane, and his second-in-command, Navarro, voiced by Robin Atkin Downes, whose credits are too long to list. But before Nathan can find out what's going on and meet our bad guys, he has to make a quick exit from the U-boat, doing so through the torpedo launcher after he accidentally activates one of these old projectiles. Remember, reverse Midas touch. That torpedo was fine on its own, then Nathan Drake happened, and now it's blowing up. Roman helps Nathan out of the water and introduces himself, but Nathan knows well enough who he is. Nathan's attitude is very hostile, and though Navarro takes exception, Roman himself is quite affable, very calm and collected. He has all the power in this situation, and he knows it. Roman is an interesting villain, one that knows not to let his emotions get in the way of business. He doesn't take baits. He doesn't let insults put him off balance. He is always in control, until he's not. Not to mention that he's an educated man, or at least he sees himself as one. He's not crass or vulgar like those around him. In this case, he explains what I just said, that Sully spoke of the find of a lifetime, but that time's up and he's here to collect, as it looks like it's another empty boast by Sully, unless Nathan found something on the boat. And of course, they already know they took Sully's walkie and heard everything, which Sullivan confirmed. Navarro seems suspicious. After all, what has this map to do with El Dorado? And Sullivan connects the dots for him. But the Germans were after the treasure, and this map is connected to that. Sully asks Roman if they're square, and the crime lord says yes, for now, but that Sully needs some encouragement and aims his gun at Nate, with Sully trying to intercede for his young partner. Nathan wonders, don't you all just cut a finger or something? But Roman finds that too vulgar. A clean gunshot is much better. Not to mention killing Nathan will hurt Sully much more. Sully attempts to step in the way, and Roman simply switches target and fires on Sully, hitting him in the chest, right on his front pocket, which is holding Sir Francis' notebook. So if you're paying close attention, you know where this is heading, but if you didn't, then you get a nice surprise somewhere down the line. Nathan tries to get to Sully desperately, but Navarro steps in his way, and as they're grappling, the active torpedo finally goes off, the explosion knocking everyone off their feet, and giving Nathan an opening to run away, setting off one of the very few chase scenes without a crash cam. Nathan runs and fights his way through guards, then as soon as he's clear, someone pulls him into a small alcove. This is Elena, and she punches him in the face for leaving her behind, and when Nathan's confused as to her arrival, she tells him she's a competent enough reporter to track down 2 treasure hunters. Just then, Nathan pushes her into a wall, and they get very up close and personal as more of Roman's goons run past them. Nathan corrects her statement, telling her it's only 1 treasure hunter now. Sully is dead, and Elena has a lot of heart. Case in point is this, she's angry. She has every reason to be, but the moment she hears Sully is dead, she tells Nathan she's sorry to hear it, and it's clear she means it. But the situation is not one for them to mourn a lost friend or mentor. There's still people after them, and Nate tells her they're gonna be just as dead unless they get a move on. Elena and Nathan fight their way through Roman's goons, and a clever thing Naughty Dog did here, to get the most out of the environments and possibly save up on assets, was to make this action level, or at least part of it, the same ruin you've already been through, only now in reverse, and with a whole lot more shooting. And speaking of shooting, this sequence starts with Nathan unarmed, Roman and Navarro having taken his gun, and it's Elena that brings the gun to this fight, and even a spare one for Nate. Nathan tells her he hopes she brought a gun, and of course she did. And when the level kicks in, she's got one herself. Elena is no damsel in distress. She's not gonna surrender the only weapon and depend on Nate to rescue her. Nope, she's gonna be right there beside him. Naughty Dog didn't waste time on this. First the boat, and then this level are enough to convey to you that Elena is Nathan's equal. She's just as capable and just as adaptable to the situation. The level and the shooting continues very much until the ruined courtyard, where the jumping tutorial happened, but now there's a difference. Elena has a jeep. Elena asks if Nathan has always been this popular, and he admits he has a knack for attracting the scum of the earth. No offense. She's not offensive. Nathan brings her up to speed, giving her the coordinates of the island for her to remember, and she's on board, saying she's gonna get her story and Nathan can get whatever it is he wants, which at this point is a bit unclear. It could very well be revenge, or it could be just the obsession with pursuing Sir Francis. After all, when he was discussing the journal with Sully, he did tell him I was right on his theory that Sir Francis Draek faked his death. So Nathan could very well just want to continue following in Drake's footsteps despite the danger. But still, he warns Elena that this is not gonna be some vacation. But she reminds him of 2 very important, very clear facts. 1, she can't take care of herself. She's proven that already. And 2, he owes her 1. And you might be thinking, technically he owes her 2. There's the ditching, and then there's the timely save and gun she just provided. But that's why she punched him when they're reunited, to pay him back for the first one. So she's right. He owes her 1. The other one's already been repaid in violence. They take Sully's hydroplane, and while Elena's doing some voiceover for her would-be show, They're struck by anti-air defenses and the airplane goes down, with both of them jumping out of the plane and using their parachutes. Nate using his in quite the panic and seemingly losing consciousness as he goes through the thick canopy, waking up to gaze at the face of an avenging angel statue, his parachute hanging from its wing. And maybe it's because it's Amy Hennig, but this statue reminds me so much of the angel statues from Legacy of Kain Defiance. Nathan drops to the ground, but realizes that he left the map on the plane. So now he has to trek through a patch of jungle, find the crash site, and reclaim the map. But Roman's forces won't make it easy for him, and the engagements in this part of the game introduce grenades into the combat, something the enemies seem to have an endless amount of and love to chuck your way. A few combat arenas and a mounting body count later, Nate comes to a broken bridge, for one of the cleverest sequences in the game, one that blurs the line between cutscene and gameplay. As Nate jumps across the different fragments of this once bridge, a jeep with bad guys arrives and they begin shooting. What's immediately clear though is that this jeep has an explosive barrel, something most, if not all players, wouldn't hesitate to shoot. After all, we all love big booms, big bada booms. And that instinct is exactly what Naughty Dog was counting on. For the moment you shoot the barrel, the jeep flies and tumbles down and wedges between two stones, forming a new bridge for Nathan to cross. With more kills under his belt at this point than the Terminator across all movies, Nathan finally gets to the crash site, where another shootout happens. Eventually, once the grass is painted red, he climbs to the front of the aircraft, wedged atop a tree. Inside he finds the map, and through one of the broken windows, he sees the place Elena must have landed in, though he only sees the abandoned parachute hanging from a tower. But Nate is already fearing the worst, and you really can't blame the guy considering the veritable battalion of mercenaries he's carved a path through to get here. He leaves the wreckage and of course, on climbing down, more lowlifes with a low life expectancy make their appearance and are quickly sent to meet their maker. Afterwards, he begins the journey to where Elena landed, thinking, quite incorrectly, that he's coming to the rescue. At the end of the trail of bodies, Nate finds the fortress atop which the tower sits on, and after climbing the outer walls in one of the coolest platforming and climbing sequences, he crashes through the grate covering a window by swinging with a thick vine, and it's a combo move. It's both the heroic cinematic move of the hero bursting through the window, and of course the reverse Midas touch. The poor grating could not resist contact with Nathan Drake, and thus it comes off the wall itself. Not to mention it's a more exaggerated version of the vine swinging that Nate has been doing so far, because only in this kind of adventure are there vines not only thick enough to grasp, but strong enough to support the weight of a full-grown man. You gotta love it. It's not Elena Nathan finds in the fortress, at least not initially, but more enemies, and these, much like those in the jungle, don't exactly look like the paramilitary types in Roman's employ in the Amazon. Instead, they look like the pirates from the opening sequence. Given that only Roman and his people knew of the island, aside from Elena, Sully, and Nate of course, it's easy to deduce that the pirates work for Roman, which colors the boat section that much more. Roman probably sent them to get the journal, given his lack of faith in Sullivan's promises. Nathan enters a makeshift communications room and spies Elena in the distance, leaning over a balcony to, essentially, grab some B-roll for her production, with Nathan bewildered by her actions. The radio comes alive and Nathan attempts to communicate with the pirates in Indonesian. And I remind you of the opening section where he tells Elena that they've been following him, and when Elena asks what he did to upset them, he says it's a long story. So he knows who he's dealing with. Nate speaks over the radio saying "Buka pintu," which means open the door in Indonesian, to which the guard replies essentially, "Who's this?" Nathan insists, telling the pirate to hurry up and open the door, but it kinda backfires on him. The door opens, but through it come even more enemies, and the shootouts take Nathan on a full tour of the fortress, its courtyards, the battlements, and even underground in an aqueduct, where they've even installed an armored turret. These pirates don't mess around. Eventually, once enough bodies have been piled up, Nathan explores the surroundings and uses them to climb atop another tower. And I mean, he uses the surroundings to climb, not the mountain of bodies. Atop it, he finds a set of old rusted keys that frankly could break at any second, especially with Nate's particular touch. Shockingly though, the keys hold, and he uses them to go deeper into the fortress and another courtyard. But much like before, it's not Elena he finds, but more pirates and more guns. But on the upside, there's something far more interesting on the other side of this conflict. A room where Nathan points a floodlight at a wall, revealing a map with a big X, some symbols, a drawing on the side of a landmark, and instructions left by Sir Francis to one of his men, a man called Fletcher, who could be Francis Fletcher, a priest of the Church of England who was one of Drake's companions, and the chaplain during his journey across the world from 1577 to 1580. The message reads, "Fletcher, we have gone to the Great Tower. I pray that you will meet us there." The message is signed using Sir Francis Drake's actual signature, which is a great detail. Gunfights and parkour later, Nathan reaches a room where he finds what he thinks is Sir Francis' telescope and uses it to scope out a large building, the same building on the coins he found before. He also notices many a sunken vessel and realizes no ship ever left this place, which is unusual to say the least. He then spies Elena, using her camera to also get a shot of the same building. There are some pirates right below him, and he hears them talking about Elena, making their intent to get her very clear. He opens fire on them, but they retaliate with some form of explosive, and so the balcony Nate is standing on blows up, making him lose consciousness. Next scene, we see Nathan in a cell, and Elena rudely wakes him up, throwing stones at him, then poking fun at him for being locked up. That he won't find El Dorado in there, and she wonders how he ended up like that in the first place, and he says that he was trying to save her. To which she replies with, "Oh, so sweet," in the most mocking tone possible. Nate still hasn't figured out, at this point, that she doesn't need saving. Elena studies the bars on the windows and the wall's composition, listing off the materials involved, something she learned from episode 4 of her show, Architects of the New World. She confidently states that it'll take just a tug to pull these bars out, then goes away while Nate calls after her, only to turn away as he hears another voice in the room adjacent to his cell. Here we meet a new character, the man at the top of the pirate food chain and a true scumbag, Eddie Raja. And his name is perfect, as Raja is Sanskrit for king, and being the leader of the pirates, this makes Eddie the Pirate King. It's clear that Eddie and Nathan have met before, and while they're cordial, they're not friends, not even rivals. Eddie has the map and says it's interesting and alludes to Sir Francis being in his same line of work, and though Nathan tells him not to flatter himself, Raja is actually on the money. Sir Francis Draek was a privateer, and if the term doesn't ring a bell, a privateer is essentially a sanctioned pirate, given a letter of marque or reprisal that they could legally engage in piracy, but only against vessels that the nation is at war with. In Sir Francis's case, that nation would be Spain, and it's likely that his privateering was how he got wind of El Dorado. In fact, to the Spanish, he was considered a pirate. Eddie doesn't know how to properly use the map though, so he presents Nathan with a deal. Help him out, and maybe, just maybe, Eddie won't kill him. And let's just say Nathan is not exactly enthused by his options, and instead of helping and dying later, he arrogantly says he'll take die now, which sets Eddie off. The pirate saying he was promised treasure on this island, which is likely how Navarro and Roman got his men on board. No matter the age, pirates be pirates, and they be all about the booty. Eddie's frustrated that he's got nothing to show for all the effort and the lives of his men. As Eddie talks, Elena is hooking up a winch to the bars on the window. Eddie calms down and reiterates that it's a good deal. They work together, and then the last man standing gets the gold and the girl. And trying to distract Eddie so he doesn't notice the big hook on the window, Nate plays along the way, saying that the girl is long gone, probably off the island and going for help. But Eddie isn't fooled and says he will find her. After all, how much trouble can a girl be? And to answer his question, Elena puts her new commandeered car in reverse, rips a hole in the wall, and Nathan takes advantage, reclaims the map from Eddie, and runs to join Elena, jumping on the back of the Jeep while she drives. kicking off the first vehicle chase in the franchise, where you fire from a mounted gun with endless ammo and blow everyone up. It's truly delightful and satisfying, especially after the scene with Eddie. You just kinda want to add to his troubles. Not to mention that it's pure Hollywood action scene nonsense, with the enemy vehicles just blowing up sky high. There's only one issue, and it's that they run out of road, coming to a skidding stop on a broken bridge. The momentum pushing Nate off the back of the Jeep, leaving him hanging for dear life. Elena reaches out and helps him back on, and he takes the wheel, but he finds two critical obstacles. The first is that the wheels are stuck. They're not pushing the Jeep forward. And the second, which they notice, a second later, is that Eddie and his men have caught up. While their conversation once again begins with a little banter, it quickly derails and Eddie accuses Nathan of working with them, and that this is all a ploy to cut him out of his part of the treasure. This of course means that Eddie thinks Nathan works for Roman too. An irate Eddie even shoots at them, the shotgun blast destroying the windshield. Eddie cocks the shotgun again and simply orders Nathan to hand over the map, a deranged look on his face. Nathan, always looking to match crazy with crazy, tells Elena to hang on and sets the car in reverse. After all, if the car is not going forward, it can still go back, going over the edge of the bridge and into the water below, where they swiftly swim across to another section of the colony, while Eddie and his men fire from above. Unfortunately, even as they get away from Eddie and his hail of gunfire, they quickly come into another spray of bullets from more of Eddie's pirates, these ones on this side of the colony. But they do manage to clear this section and reach a spot where someone has parked a jet ski. Elena shows him footage from the big building he'd spied on using the telescope, saying that it's likely that El Dorado went through that, being something of a harbor control building. But Nathan notices something else, a boat moored to the dock, and he says that's our way out. Much to Elena's surprise, she's dumbfounded that he would give up, leave everything, even forget about Drake. Nathan says they're outnumbered, and he doesn't want her body on his conscience. But Elena calls out his nonsense and tells him if he wants to go, to do so, but to not use her as an excuse. So he snaps and admits that it's him, he wants to go, that this is not worth dying for. I love this scene, because it's an inversion of expectation, but one consistent with the characterization so far. What do I mean? The audience expects the treasure hunter to be all about the goal, all about the prize, no matter the danger, and for the civilian to be the reasonable one, the one to point out that, hey, we're gonna get ourselves killed if we continue. And yet, in this scene, it's the opposite. Nathan's being reasonable, and Elena is not backing down. But it's consistent. Nathan just lost Sully. He's carrying that loss, and that makes him shift his priorities. And Elena's determination and stubbornness are unmatched. This is her story, and she wants it, and she's gonna get it. Elena seemingly relents and says, okay, fine, but that they still need to go and check out the harbor. Once there, they can have any argument about what to do, which she kinda jokingly says will be a lot of fun. She moves towards the jet ski, likely aiming to drive, but given how the last one went, Nathan says, no, this time I'll drive, which leads to the first of two jet ski sequences. In this one, you control Nathan on the driving and Elena on the shooting. And I've always found that to be a very clever implementation. It works just as it does while running and shooting, same controls, only in animation it's performed by two different characters. The pair cross a flooded section of the colony, Nathan weaving the jet ski in between mine-like explosive barrels, while Elena, not to be outdone in the destruction and death toll factor by Nathan, takes out the pirates standing in their way with a grenade launcher. Elena and Nathan are of the Mythbusters school of thought. If it's worth doing, it's worth overdoing. And I know jet ski might make you think this is a fast-paced scene where you race past the environment, and that couldn't be further from the truth. This is a slow and methodical section where you gotta be careful on every corner, as the enemies are packing some serious heat, including sniper rifles and their own grenade launchers. At times, you also leave the jet ski behind for some on-foot sections with Nate, to open a gate of some kind so you can continue your journey. But there's really not that much to say about this section, other than that it's a bit too long, and Nate's already wet from the water. so why not also get wet from the blood of his enemies? Along the way, they reach something like a harbor master's office, with all the manifests of the many ships that came and went from the island. On the desk is a book with the pages in extraordinarily good condition, especially for something from A, the 16th century, and B, in a tremendously humid place like this. Not saying the book should be illegible. No, I'm saying the book should be mush. The worst thing in the world for the preservation of old tomes are heat and humidity, both of which this place has in spades. Nevertheless, Nathan reads the entries aloud. 800 gold bars, 1200 silver, emeralds, golden masks, ornaments, etc. Elena is seriously impressed with his ability to read 16th century Spanish, and jokes that he's not just a grave robber after all. Nathan ignores her playful jab because he's found something interesting. Gold statue, weight 20 arrobas. That's kinda hefty. And even better than the listing, the next page has a drawing of the MacGuffin, El Dorado, and it looks ominous as hell, giving Elena the creeps, and who can blame her? Perhaps more curious than even El Dorado is that the entry on the statue is the last ever entry into this logbook. Every page after it is completely blank, meaning something happened to the colony right after the arrival of the idol. That's never good. As he mulls over the discovery, Nathan plays with the ring he carries around his neck, to which Elena asks, jokingly, "Somebody special?" And when Nathan says it is, she's surprised, having assumed that he was a girl in every port kind of a guy. Nathan laughs and explains that the ring belonged to Sir Francis, and it's inscribed with his personal motto, Sic Parvis Magna, greatness from small beginnings. The ring also bears a date, 29th January 1596, one day after his official historical death. The ring is not only what convinced Nathan that Sir Francis had faked his death, it also has the coordinates to the coffin off the coast of Panama. And the nice touch is that when the camera does a close-up of Elena handling the ring, you can see the motto on the outside and letters on the inside of the ring, presumably the coordinates and the date. They fight their way through the building, turning even more pirates into permanent fixtures of the environment, and come to a balcony where Elena casually looks around and says, "Oh well, we missed the boat," making no effort in hiding the fact that she doesn't want to go. Nate, however, looks around carefully and corrects her, says, "The boat is over there, we just need to go and get it." And so Elena tells him, "Oh, you go do that, I'll stick around here and collect some more footage, some B-roll for the show." Nate is dubious about her intentions, not to mention her safety, but she assures him that she'll be just fine. Reluctantly, Nathan agrees, but asks her to please stay put. She's not gonna stay put. We all know it. The next section is one of the few in the game that combines parkour with gunfights. You bust your way through a side door leading to a series of balconies with a locked door at the end. So you need to shoot the padlock off, jump across the chasms between the balconies, while at the same time contending with more of the goons. At the end, there's a mechanism to open a grate, and it leads to one of the biggest gunfights in the entire game, and likely the last of Eddie Raja's payroll. This room is big, has a bunch of convenient cover points, but the enemies come in droves, and there's even a turret at the end. It's the last stand of the Indonesian pirates, and it doesn't end well for them. You send them all down to meet Davy Jones, which is likely while some stragglers are packing up to leave on the boat. Nathan approaches stealthily, aiming to likely inflict some kind of lethal bodily harm upon them to take the boat, but he's interrupted by Elena, who urges him to take a look at what she recorded, and in the footage, we see a helicopter with Roman, Navarro, and a very much alive and kicking Sullivan. Nathan has a moment of genuine shock, where the only thing he can say is, "Huh," which is a very nice touch, and I really like it because it's very clever writing. Being at a loss of words at discovering something so monumental as the person I thought was dead because I saw them get shot in front of me is actually alive is perfectly natural. Elena snaps him out of it and gets his mind back in gear with her suspicions about Sully, asking Nate how much he trusts the guy, since, after all, it doesn't look like he's being threatened or manhandled. But Nathan reassures her, saying Sully is many things, but not someone who'll stab you in the back. From the direction the helicopter was going, they realize they need to head to the mountains and the monastery that's found there. Elena asks the very important question: what if he's actually a backstabber? For Nathan, it's a simple choice. They either rescue him or beat the ever-loving crap out of him, and in fact, for putting them through all of this, he might just kick his butt anyway. Elena's camera is a nice tool, right? So of course, it's time to get rid of it. Have her feel some sense of loss, to balance things out, you know? As they're crossing a wooden bridge connecting two sections of the dilapidated building, one of the boards gives and Elena drops, but holds on with one hand, the other clutching the camera that is most definitely not what anyone would call lightweight. So Nathan dives and grabs her, but in that classic action moment of "Give me your other hand!", which to me is a reference to Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade when, near the end, Indy is hanging in a similar way, his father telling him to give him the other hand, but Indiana is focused on getting the Holy Grail, until his father snaps him back to reality and he abandons the pursuit in favor of safety. So too in this moment, Elena needs to let go of all her hard work and the reason she put herself through all this, the story, the show. She needs to let it go to survive. At the end of this section, they turn even more pirates into an endangered species and grab another jet ski for the second jet ski section of the game, one that is upriver, and at first, you can very much ignore everything and just go. But eventually you need to start shooting some fools getting in your way, and some barrels that they throw your way as well. I have but one word to describe this section, and that is obnoxious. Having to go against the current just makes this sequence feel much longer than it needs to be, and having to stop to weave around explosive barrels or shoot them plus all the enemies, it just drags on a little bit too much. But this journey upriver takes them to where Roman and his forces went, the monastery. They took the scenic air route. Nathan and Elena did the Jungle Cruise Disney ride. The path to the monastery marks one of the last few times we'll see Eddie's pirates in the game. In fact, you find one dead, impaled in a spring-load trap that was made using parts of their downed plane. So it wasn't made by the Spanish, nor by any of their competitors, meaning there's locals. Nathan says they're being watched, and then sees some strange footprints in the mud. Elena wonders if it's somebody or something, but before she can ask more, Nathan realizes all sound has stopped, which in a jungle is unusual and the typical horror movie clue that you need to get out of Dodge right away. Cause there's likely a maniac in a hockey mask about to hunt you. You might be wondering if Eddie's pirates are gone. Do we not get new enemies? Of course we do! Eddie might have lost everyone on his Secret Santa list, but Roman has enough money for his own private army, and it's them you gotta deal with. And these dudes pack even more heat, including laser-sighted magnums you need to avoid at all costs because they're one-hit kills. Fortunately, the game gives you the way to do so, by Dark Souls rolling around. This mechanic applies to both sniper rifles and these powerful magnums. The entire mountain area is the monastery, and it has a bunch of different buildings. The first one we find is merely the entrance or courtyard of the thing, and passing through is what seems like an entire city district. This is a monastery in the same way the Vatican is. It's big, and it even has a huge library, one that Elena and Nathan stealthily step into, after an endless barrage of gunfire. Once inside, they hear Sully's voice. He's telling a story that begins very sweet, but soon, as one would expect from a dirty old man like Sully, starts to become rather lurid. Unfortunately, the guards left with him don't let him finish and tell him to shut up, that he's told that particular story at least a dozen times. And then he says, right, of course, memory is not what it used to be, which is a lie. The player spent the full chapter with Sully, and in it he told more than one story, and at no point did he give the impression that his mind was anything other than a steel trap. He's sharp, so this obvious lie is a clue to the player, and to the other characters in the story, into the fact that he's giving Roman and his goons the runaround, stalling, misdirecting. But then he says something that is very important. When the guard questions what's taking him so long, presumably to find any relevant information, Sully says these books are half rotten and in Spanish, which is important because it goes back to that ledger that Nate found that was perfectly legible. That book was open on a table in a room near the water, and it was in perfect condition. These books are in a library on a mountain and they're rotten. It presents a strange lack of consistency, meaning it's all plot related. A book will be legible if the plot deems it important to be in such a condition. Granted, in the grand scheme of things, it's nothing but a nitpick, but it always bugged me and messed with my sense of immersion if the logic of the world didn't make full sense. Nathan leans in a little too much to listen to what Sully is saying, and that draws the attention of the guards to him, and the big library shootout begins. Once everybody's library cards have been voided, Sully gets up from under the deck he used as cover and says it's about damn time for Nate to show up. Nate quips about Sully looking real good for a corpse. Sully ignores the comment and points to Elena saying, you brought the girl after all, in something of a dismissive tone. Elena is not pleased with the girl comment, and Nathan backs her up by telling Sully that without her, this rescue wouldn't be happening at all. And he's right. Everything from meeting him in the jungle and giving him a gun, to having a jeep to escape, down to getting the footage of Sully on camera are all things Elena did that contribute to them being in this room at this time to save his story behind. So yeah, Nate's 100% right on this. But Elena still has her suspicions and replies to Nate's comment of a rescue with, if this is a rescue. Sully seems offended, but Nate points out how suspicious this all looks. He tipped Roman off on what they were doing, and now, miraculously, he's alive. Sully, quite taken aback by the attitude they have, explains that Roman had a contract out on him, and he needed to buy some time. Nate snaps back saying that if for once he'd kept his mouth shut, they'd be on their way home with the treasure instead of dealing with a criminal mastermind and his armies. And we've had enough evidence of Sully liking to spin a yarn for this comment to land. But Sully snaps back that Nate should have checked for a pulse instead of just assuming he was dead. But I have to call foul here. Nate didn't exactly have the time to go checking up on a corpse. The U-boat had just exploded and things were not looking good for him, so he had to run to escape. But intent on moving on to more pressing matters, Sully says none of it matters anymore, and Elena asks the smart question. How exactly is Sully alive? And with a chuckle, Sully reveals the journal of Sir Francis Draek, and it's got a bullet hole in it. Nathan laughs in surprise, saying that Sir Francis came through for them and that he thought this kind of thing only happened in movies. Remember what I said before? If you paid attention, in that scene Sully has the journal in his front pocket, so you could foresee this happening. For everyone else, this was quite the fun twist, but one that checks out story-wise. Now, physics-wise, it can be a bit murkier. I'm not a gun expert. I'm not a gun guy. If there is one watching, please tell me in the comments and correct me. But the gun that Roman carries is, as far as I've been able to find out, a snub-nosed revolver, likely carrying .38 special ammo. And I've seen videos of that kind of caliber punching holes straight through phone books. And book-binding leather is not exactly hard stuff to shoot through, so Sully should be dead. So he's indeed miraculously alive. Back to the story, Sully tells them that when they found out he wasn't dead, Sully convinced them that they needed him to find the treasure, and instead he's been misleading them ever since, to buy some time for Nate to show up. He then shows them the journal, and it turns out Sir Francis had it all figured out. He knew the symbol the Spaniards used to mark their vaults, and so they have all the information they need to find the treasure for themselves. Elena comes around and puts her arms around their necks and just casually asks if they're gonna try to leave the girl behind again. And Nate looks to Sully and says, don't even think about it, she's got a mean right hook. Sully says he'll keep it in mind. And with that, the trio has reunited and the protagonist party is formed. Using Sir Francis Drake's notes, they complete a puzzle around the room and open the way into a secret area behind the bookcase, which leads to another door into quote-unquote the land of the dead, aka catacombs. Nate decides to go down on his own, figuring he'll make less noise that way and avoid some bigger confrontation. Here's a hint, that's not gonna happen. Shooting guns is in his future. Elena tells him to be careful. He attempts to reassure her about always being safe and then smacks his head on the wall because karma is a thing. The catacombs are one of the very few areas in Uncharted Drake's Fortune that are dark and grimy, without the usual color spectacle, so they stand out in contrast, at least visually speaking. But even so, there's plenty of sources of illumination. You're never in pitch darkness. The catacombs take him up to the inside of a church where more of Roman's goons await. After they've been read their last rites, Nate notices the bells on the other side of the altar, remembering something in the journal. What he fails to notice at this moment, though it will become clear later, as obvious to see as it is now, is the stained glass bearing the symbol for the Spanish vault. It's just not time in the plot for him to notice. The bell puzzle opens a new way down, once again taking Nathan into the catacombs, where he uses the local accommodations for the departed to lay more of Roman's men to rest, and then comes to a small room with a grate above, and he eavesdrops on a conversation between Roman, Navarro, and Eddie. Roman is not happy with the pirates, and Eddie demands to know what Roman expects, that his men are getting slaughtered. Roman refuses to believe that a single man can take care of his entire crew. He really hasn't been paying attention, has he? But Eddie says it's not just Nathan, but that there's something else here, that the island is cursed. And at that point, Roman's had enough. He tells Eddie to take his people and just go. Eddie demands his payment, a share of the treasure, and Roman very clearly reminds him that his cut was dependent on him doing his job, capturing Nathan and securing the island, none of which has happened. So if we're going by just business, Roman's got a point. Roman dismisses poor Mr. Raja, who says some kind words in Indonesian, very much in line with eat crap and die, and storms out. Roman turns to Navarro and asks why he hired such a superstitious idiot, and Navarro simply shrugs and says, "Hey, you wanted someone cheap." To which Roman says, "Well, you get what you pay for, don't you?" Roman turns to Navarro and asks if he is worth the money Roman is spending on him. Navarro is certain that the treasure is here, and if Sully can be trusted, to which Roman interjects he can't. Navarro is under the impression that Sully won't lie because they'll kill him if he is. But Roman corrects him and says that Sully knows they'll kill him once they find the treasure, which means it's in Sully's best interest to never tell them the truth. See, Roman's a smart villain. Then Roman says something interesting. He doesn't call it Sully's treasure, or the treasure Sullivan brought to them. He says to Navarro, "This treasure of yours is proving to be more trouble than it's worth." And Navarro tells him that El Dorado is worth far more than he realizes. This is the first clue given to you that Navarro knows more than he's letting on about the treasure and everything regarding it. As far as the player and Nathan know, El Dorado is just a slab of gold, but Navarro's words hint at something deeper. The next few gunfights showcase something I like to call the teleporting soldiers, where the enemies in the next incoming wave of goons come from rooms from which there is no other entrance or exit. So they were either having a smoke break while you gunned down their friends, or they just manifested out of thin air to join the fight. With Elena and Sully's help, and a little information given through the walkie-talkie, Nate heads inside the church once more, but on the upper levels. And this time, he does notice the stained glass. After another parkour puzzle, the stained glass window opens, allowing Nathan to climb through into a room with a window overlooking the actual vault. The place where Sullivan sent Roman and his goons on what he thought was a wild goose chase, in a case of accidental competence. He tells Sully what the hell's going on and that he needs him to create a distraction to get Navarro and his people out of there, but then to come and meet him, but using the catacombs as it's safer. Of course it's safer, because Nathan has already turned everyone in there and on the upper levels into compost. Of course it's safer. They meet back up in the same room we saw Roman and Navarro having their discussion with Eddie. There's a puzzle to be solved here, and it leads them into a secret room with an exit that heads further into the underground. Elena notices the exit first, and as she's walking over, she steps on a pressure plate. That triggers a trap that closes the little hatch the previous puzzle had opened, splitting Elena and Nate from Sully, who remains on the other side. Nate tells him to head back to the library, and it's a good plan. After all, the secret room they found is a good safe house. Nathan and Elena enter something of a multi-level labyrinth, with metal plates bearing Roman numerals representing different paths to take, and this is where the map from way back when comes into play, as it has the Roman numerals on it that they need to follow to reach the end of this area and get back to the surface. So they find some more pirates here, which is a bit of a surprise given how many of them are now dead. But they also catch sights and sounds of other people, a group other than the pirates or the soldiers, likely the locals who set the traps. Journey ends in a small vault-like room where they find a historical treasure of a kind, the mummified remains of Sir Francis Draek, still in his armor. Nate commiserates over Sir Francis just dying here without ever finding the treasure, and it seems to deflate him. He takes the necklace off, holds the ring, and says, "So much for greatness. Wasted his life for nothing," dropping the ring at the body's feet. It's almost as if Nathan expected to find Sir Draek still alive, or maybe that he had found the treasure and took it, which would then lead them somewhere else as part of the treasure hunt. His death at this juncture of the treasure hunt hits him hard, like meeting your hero and realizing they're not as special as you once thought. Elena's words snap him back to reality. She's asking if he's ready to go, and he says now more than ever. But they're still kind of stuck in this room, so the first thing is to find an exit. They see a broken ladder, and with Elena climbing on his shoulders, Nate helps boost her up to reach the upper rungs, helping her escape the room. On the upper levels, she sees a tunnel. Right then, an explosion outside the room makes Nate turn around, and he sees the back of Eddie and one of his pirates. Nate greets them, then tries to talk them into lowering their weapons, but they look panicked. And when Nate asks what's going on, Eddie simply says, "Didn't you see them?" While his crew member is having a full-blown panic attack. Eddie says, "We're trapped! We're dead! We're all dead!" As the other pirate shuffles back, he reaches the edge of the broken floor, from which a clawed hand reaches out, grabs him, and pulls him down into the darkness and his untimely demise. And we see, finally, what the locals look like, and it's, zombies. Oh, no, more like mutants. Wiry, lanky, savage-looking people in loincloths and without any hair on their bodies, with long claw-like fingernails and sharp teeth, who move with an inhuman agility. So it's Nathan and Eddie back-to-back, a united front against these new enemies, who hit like a freight train and can take you out with ease, making this section one of the hardest in the game, and a place where you'll likely spend a little bit of time dying over and over. As they fight back the horde, Eddie makes the regrettable mistake of getting too cocky, and it gets him killed, leaving Nate to fight another wave on his own as he begs for Elena to hurry up. And after a few more Teenage Mutant Ninja Cannibals are put down, she comes through and drops a rope for him to climb, which he does, and then at the top we kick off another crash cam sequence where we run forward while shooting back at the creatures, eventually crossing a bulkhead door they swiftly close behind them, leaving them in the control room for what looks like a harbor. Remember the U-boat? This is where it came from. This entire place is a German base, and some documents on the table show that the Germans found El Dorado, but it shows that the statue is still at the bottom of the monastery, meaning where Nate and Elena are now is right on top of it. Elena sees an old elevator they could use, but there's no power. A small map on the side tells them the generator is on the other side of the base, but they've got no way to go, until Elena picks up a heavy metal crate and throws it at a side window, shattering it. But she can't go. She can't make the jump needed to reach the structures and pipes they'll have to climb across to reach the other side of the base. Nathan says he's not gonna leave her here with those things so close, but ever the pragmatist, Elena tells him they don't have a choice and sends him on his way. On the other side, Nathan finds essentially the Nazi version of an Umbrella Corp base. Or, in other words, the kind of base you'd find in 4 out of 5 Wolfenstein games. Experiments were conducted here, and it's crawling with the wildlings. Let's call them that, wildlings. After restoring power, Nathan returns to a room full of beds where now a projector is running, and he sees photos of El Dorado and images of a German soldier turned savage, like those wild creatures he's been fighting. He also finds a photo of the vault where he found the body of Sir Francis, the photo showing a German soldier standing in front of El Dorado and Sir Francis dead at its base. And with the photo is an old letter, yet another impossible piece of perfectly preserved documentation. The letter is the last testament of Sir Francis Draek. He says El Dorado bears a terrible curse, and that the Spaniards unleashed it on the island and became like demons. And as Nate reads this, he sees the recording of the same German individual we see in the photo, now chained to a pillar as he rages like a madman. The letter continues, and Sir Francis says his people are dead, so the task fell to him, and he scuppered the ships so none could leave, and then drowned the colony. Meaning all of the destruction we saw, the buildings torn apart, everything flooded, was the work of Sir Francis Draek. But his time is near, and so he commends his soul to God. Meaning Nate had it all wrong. Sir Francis didn't just waste away or live for nothing. He gave it all to save everyone else. The recording also ties back to the Amazon. Remember how the captain is described as being torn up and the U-boat was covered in blood? That crew might have gotten exposed to whatever it is that El Dorado does. Nate continues fighting and reaches another control room. This one opposite to the one he was with Elena, who's no longer alone, now having the company of Roman, Navarro, and some of their men, with Navarro gripping Elena's arm as she struggles to break free. That control room has a mic, but the one Nate is in doesn't, so Nathan has no choice but to listen and not be able to reply. Elena breaks free for a moment and urges Nathan to run away, but Navarro grabs her again and this time punches her in the stomach, so Roman can't help but be disappointed in Navarro, telling him if he can't keep control of a small girl. But Navarro doesn't let him finish and just immediately assures him that it won't happen again. Roman apologizes for the interruption, thanks Nathan for leading them to El Dorado, and says they'll keep Elena with them if he doesn't mind, just to make sure that he and Sully don't try anything creative. And I just love Roman so much. It helps that he's voiced by Simon Templeman. He's just so smooth. He's a classic pulp adventure villain, educated, charming even, but undoubtedly evil. He's affably evil. Roman, Navarro, and Elena leave through the elevator, and Nathan can hear their men coming close to his position, which kicks off another very long and difficult combat sequence, this one taking you through the entire base, fighting not only the wildlings, but also Roman's men. And I gotta give props to Naughty Dog for not making the mistake that many developers make, where enemies tend to forget their own narrative enmities just because you show up. No, in this case, the wildlings and the soldiers will attack one another, making this a true three-way fight. Nathan emerges victorious from the Battle of the Three Armies and heads back to the monastery where Sully's pinned down by enemy gunfire. And once they've been dispatched and they've opened the path to El Dorado through a secret door under the church's altar, Nate brings his partner up on everything that's happened and everything he's uncovered. Sully thinks he sounds ridiculous talking about curses. Nathan just tells him to trust him as they head down to the real location of El Dorado. As they approach, Roman's men step from behind them and disarm them, with Roman confidently telling them that by now they should know he plans for every contingency. And that seems to be true, but Roman, as good a villain as he is, does have a flaw, one that we've seen on display throughout the story. He's impatient, and much like others in the tale, he's very greedy. And so, as Navarro points out that El Dorado's real prize is inside, by the way, something no one else knows, and now more blatantly cluing the player in that Navarro knows way more than anybody else, and as he urges Roman to open it, the crime boss is so close to the prize and has dealt with so many delays that he doesn't see the trap springing around him. Remember when Navarro said that El Dorado was far more valuable? He is right. The gold is not the prize. El Dorado is a sarcophagus, and the prize is the fungus, or viral agent coming off the body like dust, which, when inhaled, turns people into savage wildlings. El Dorado's real worth is as a bioweapon. Roman is exposed, and Navarro tells Elena to watch closely, as he knows exactly what's about to happen. As he convulses, Roman closes El Dorado before dropping to his knees, and fully turns into one of the zombies from 28 Days Later. And only then does he realize that Navarro screwed him over. To be fair, he should have treated Navarro with a little bit more respect, but he didn't. Zombie Roman lunges and Navarro puts him down like a dog. Navarro shouts the order for the men to drop the net, with the soldiers wrapping it around El Dorado for it to be airlifted. Nathan attempts to appeal to Navarro, telling him that El Dorado wiped out an entire colony, that he doesn't know what he's doing taking it away. Navarro says he's the only one on the island who knows exactly what he's doing, and that all of them are so pathetic, worrying about gold when the biological agent is worth far more to the right buyer. And he's right. Come on, a zombie virus? That would sell for far more than all the gold in the world. But as Navarro speaks, the locals arrive, and when Sully asks what the hell they are, Nathan drops such a good line. It's the Spaniards. They never left. The wildlings attack everyone, and Nathan and Sully use the opportunity to beat the two guards who were covering them and take their guns. By this time, Navarro and Elena are gone, up a set of stairs to the outside and on a helicopter. Nathan runs after them, with Sully providing cover, and as the net raises El Dorado higher, Nathan decides to just jump on it and grab tightly, flying over the island to a freight ship waiting for them a few miles off the coast. The soldiers still on land inform Navarro of their hanging passenger, and he orders one of the men on the chopper to lean out and shoot Nathan. But Elena kicks him off instead, the man spraying fire wildly and killing the pilot. Navarro attempts to regain control but doesn't quite do it, and as the chopper begins to drop, Nathan lets go, landing on the ship, and we see the helicopter crash and skid across the helipad, ending up teetering over the edge. Elena is still on it, unconscious, and Navarro jumps out, ordering the men to kill Nathan. And so the final battle begins, and it sucks. It goes on too long, and at times it's unclear what you need to do, and the game more or less teaches you by killing you. It's 3 consecutive shootouts with Navarro and some goons, and Navarro is invulnerable, so you just have to kill the soldiers while taking cover behind flimsy boxes that break after a few rounds. So you have to be very good and quick and efficient with your fire, as Navarro's shotgun now has a laser sight, which means if he gets you, it's 1 shot, 1 kill. After the 3rd round of this, you step on the helipad, where you need to wait behind cover for him to reload, so you can run to another cover that is closer, so that you can eventually run at him to punch him in a quick time event sequence. This leads to a small cutscene where his gun is thrown to the side and you scuffle a bit, before he kicks you away and runs for his gun. Now, your first instinct, based on everything else that has happened so far in this challenge, would be to go for cover. But no, that's not how it works. No, you need to run up to him immediately and punch him again, otherwise you're dead and you're gonna be doing the thing all over again. Eventually you succeed and knock him out, moving to help Elena off the helicopter, and she warns you that Navarro is getting to his feet. Nathan notices a loop of steel cable around Navarro's ankle going from the topsy-turvy helicopter to El Dorado's net. So Nathan puts his back into it and pushes the helicopter down into the water, snapping the loop close around Navarro's ankle and dragging him into the depths with his treasure, for a fitting end for this character. Nathan and Elena have a sigh of relief and see Sully approaching on a boat, still smoking a cigar and waving at them. While they wait, they lean on the railing and Elena says, "What a day!" While Nate replies, "It's just a typical day of saving the world and triumphing over evil." He does regret they're leaving with nothing. Elena says she's not so sure about that and hands him the necklace with Sir Francis Drake's ring, which she picked up down in the vault. And that's one bit that I can't go back to a scene and prove that it happened, because her leaning down to pick it up never happens on camera. Though she is close enough to the body after the cutscene, and you do turn your back on her while exploring the room, so she could have picked it up without us noticing. They have something of a moment, and as Nathan leans in for the kiss that is a staple of every adventure ever made, Sully ruins it by telling them they have a weird sense of romance. Nate tells him he looks like hell, and we see Sullivan covered in bruises. But Sully shrugs and says you should see the other folks, and if the abandoned U-boat is anything to go by, we know how badly everyone else looks. Sully tells him, "Hey, I found a boat," but they reply they already have a boat, a bigger boat. But Sully says, "I like this one much more," and reveals piles of treasure. As they sail away on Sully's treasure cruise, Nate looks back at the island they're leaving behind. Elena joins him and Nate tells her that he's sorry she didn't get her story. You know, for her show. But she tells him it's okay. there will be other stories, but she does remind him he still owes her. He puts his arm around her, pulls her close, and says, "I'm good for it." And so they're riding to the sunset and end the first big adventure Nathan, Elena, and Sully would embark on. Thus ends Uncharted: Drake's Fortune. One hell of a trip with a cast with wonderful chemistry, and in what is the constant trope of the series, a mystery of ancient treasure with some kind of mystical legend that proves to be much more scientific and logical in nature, and yet remains thoroughly fantastical. Join me next time as we go with Nathan and his friends on the hunt for the Chintamani Stone and another uncharted locale, the legendary city of Shambhala. Let's explore the treasures and the events of Uncharted 2 Among Thieves.